Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. This is tips for applying for education, fellowships, and grants. I'm going to go over what to do, what not to do, and why to do or not do those things. But first of all, who am I to say? I'm a national board certified teacher, and at the time that I'm recording this video, I'm in my 22nd year of teaching. I'm an author of multiple books and published articles. I'm a presenter in the education world, and I'm a nonprofit board member. And then in the specific realm of fellowships and grants, I've won some big ones, and I've also been a reviewer for them as well. And throughout that process, there are a lot of things that just really come up as important tips and tricks for getting your applications to the next level. So let's dig into those things. I have 7 things that every applicant should do and 5 tips of what not to do. So, top 7 things to do first. Number 1, you absolutely want to answer the question directly. So it's amazing how many people write absolutely beautiful words and never actually answer the question. So without actually answering the questions, the reviewers absolutely can't score you high. It's important to consider that they 99% of the time have a rubric that they are looking at when they're scoring your application, and that rubric is based off the questions. So number 2, separate the individual parts of the question to the greatest extent possible. And I'm going to give an example here that I made up, but it's using a lot of lingo that you would see in, say, a grant proposal in the education world. So tell us about your project, including your goals, steps, timelines, and how you'll measure success. It's not uncommon for applicants to wrap all that together in one giant paragraph, but that's not what we want. What's important is to break apart the prompt, circle, highlight, underline, whatever works for you, and figure out, okay, what are the sections that they want? So here, I would say that there are 5 main sections. Tell about the project, goals, steps, timelines, and how you'll measure success. So after you separate out what you need, you also want to figure out the best order to write them in. And in my example, I think the best order is actually the order that they appear in the prompt. But I have seen fellowships and grants where the most logical order is not necessarily what they have in the prompt. For example, it wouldn't make sense most of the time to write how you will measure success as the first item. So as a reviewer, what I really like to see is actually name your sections, and if possible, in the format of the application, separate out your sections, like with a space. So tell us about your project. What I would do is I would write project, and then I would tell about it. I would skip a line and then write my goals, and I might even number them. Then I would skip a line. I would write my steps, maybe even number them. Might give dates with my steps if I know that. Skip a line. Timeline, list that out. Skip a line. Success criteria, and then describe. So it's important to make what you're writing as clear as possible for the reviewer. And one of the best ways to do that is by separating out what they want in the question. Number 3, definitely try to incorporate their own words. So the organization, the foundation, the person, the entity that's hosting this grant or fellowship, they are telling you what words are important to them. So absolutely use them. So I think it's really important to make a word chart by doing a word hunt. So what you want to do is you want to word hunt in the application itself and word hunt on this entity's website. Look at their mission, look at their vision, look at their history and background. Who are some of the key players in this organization? Then your word chart should list nouns, adjectives, verbs. I just made these up. I wasn't actually looking at a website, but you want to list out the words that you see in the application, in the description of the grant or the fellowship, words that you see in their website that ring out as important to you. So, I'm not necessarily saying that you have to use the form of the word they use. For example, the verb implement, like implement this project, you could turn that into a noun, implementation. Either way is fine, but you want to use their vocabulary. Then when they have people reading it, they'll be like, oh, wow, this person's really speaking our language. Yeah, because you did the homework. You don't necessarily have to use all of the words. Depending upon the words, that could be a little bit overkill, but I would recommend like 80 to 90% of them. If the organization has a really, really, really extensive website, or the application part of their website is really extensive, well, then it's okay to use more of the words because they're using more words themselves. But if there's not a lot that they say, then don't feel like you have to necessarily use every single word you think is a key word. Next, number 4, if at all possible, look at how you will be scored before you start writing your application, while you're writing it, and then after you wrote it, when you're like checking through your answers before hitting submit. So here, sometimes they will tell you exactly how you will be scored, but other times you might have to hunt a little bit. So they might tell you in the application itself, they might tell you on a different part of their website. And if they don't, I think it's perfectly appropriate to write to them and ask and just say, hey, would you, is the scoring available, or the scoring criteria available for applicants? They might tell you no, but it's not going to matter if they tell you no. And if they tell you yes, well then great, you have a leg up on everybody else. Then number 5, goals and standards are not the same thing. So please separate them in your answers. This is common on fellowship and grant applications where they ask about goals that you have for the program or for what you're trying to implement with grant money, and they may ask you to tie it to standards. Absolutely not the same. You want to keep them separate and be clear on your own understanding of goals and standards before you start writing. So goals are varied. It might be your own personal goals. It might be goals that you have for your students or your classroom as a whole, maybe just a specific class, or for your school or your district. Standards, on the other hand, well, there are state standards, there are content area standards, there are national standards. So I don't think it usually matters what standards you speak to, but just make sure you're being clear about what the standard is. As far as goals go, I don't think it's a bad idea to include goals in more than one category. Like to say, hey, a personal goal I have for this project or this fellowship is X, Y, or Z. But I have goals for my students once I achieve this project or fellowship. And those goals include da, 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 da. Hitting a couple of those categories, I think, shows that you're more reflective, and reviewers are always looking for the reach. Like if we give this person this fellowship or this grant, what is the impact that they will then disseminate? So they're looking for kind of the ripple effect. So if you can bring in more entities, that's a good thing. Item number 6, please write out your budget in a detailed grid. Reviewers just generally like that better. I also don't think it's a bad idea to include hyperlinks to the items that you're asking for in a grant. It's not 100% necessary, it's just a nice touch. And I don't think that the detailed budget needs to be overly detailed. I think these four categories are pretty adequate. And then number 7, please, please, please check your spelling and your grammar. I recommend typing up your answers in a Word doc or in a Google Doc, not actually in the format on their website, which is more than likely how you're submitting. So if you do this, first of all, you know that you're saving it. Whereas when you hit save in the application online, I cannot tell you how many times I've hit save and all of a sudden the website isn't working and all my answers were lost. So doing it in a Word doc or a Google Doc, you know it's saved, and then the next time you apply for something that's similar or apply for the same fellowship or grant, you can cut and paste answers and tweak off of that. Also, if you're working in a Word or Google Doc, then you can have some spelling and grammar support. Now, technically, spelling doesn't usually count. Sometimes it might, but usually it doesn't. But you want to impress the reviewer. And being a teacher who doesn't know the difference between there, and there is just not a great way to impress the reviewer. Now let's get into what not to do. So item number 1, do not use flowery language. Even if you can write that way, it's not needed here. So a good way to think of it is an application for a grant or a fellowship is not like writing an essay in an English class. It's a lot more like writing a lab report in a science class. It's direct and it's to the point. Reviewers absolutely want you to be succinct. First of all, if you're succinct, then they don't have to hunt for the answers, which is great. But second of all, they have a stack of applications to go through. And the ones that are succinct, then they can go faster. They don't have to hunt for answers. It feels really good. You don't want to be so brief that you're not answering the question. I don't mean that, but I mean, don't add in flowery language just to show your English writing prowess. Introductions and conclusions aren't necessary. 99.9% of the time, I think they detract. And if there is a word count limit, these absolutely just eat up words without adding to your application. And like I said before, there are a lot of things that I have, or applications I have reviewed that I'm like, oh, this person writes so lovely and didn't say anything. And again, word count. So number 2, please do not use acronyms without defining them first. So first of all, that's just good writing, but I'll give an example here. You want to keep in mind that you don't know who is reviewing your answers. So an example I'm giving is, I aligned my goals with the NYWL standards. What does that mean? So someone reviewing your application might be a teacher, but they might also have never taught. You don't know. So even if they are a teacher, they might not have ever taught in your content area. So the second example, I teach in an international baccalaureate, and then in parentheses, IB, high school. Then in the rest of the application, it's okay to use IB because you already defined it. First one, not what we want. Second one, definitely what we want. Then for number 3, in your budget, do not round up an obnoxious amount. So I'll give an example. There is a budget. It's formatted like I recommended. And the total is $16.50. Okay, wonderful. So ask for $1,650. Do not ask for $2,000. I was reviewing a grant and this exact thing happened. The total was somewhere around like 15 or 1,700, and the person asked for $2,000. It said nowhere in the grant application or requirement or directions to round up. Not at all. So first of all, it made me laugh that the person did this. But second of all, it made me think that seems kind of shady. And it made the person appear less trustworthy, which again, you don't want a reviewer thinking you're untrustworthy with your application. Number 4, please in your application, do not beg. I was reviewing an application for something that included a travel experience. And I'm going to use the example of France. It was not to France, but I'll just use that as an example. In every single question, there was an applicant who, in so many words, just kept on writing, pick me, please pick me. I always have wanted to go to France. I've always dreamed of going to France, all throughout the application, at the expense of actually answering the questions in a succinct, scholarly way. It was not a good look, and that scored the lowest I think I had ever scored that particular year's applications. So not a good idea. Number 5, please don't apply for something that you're not qualified for. I'll give an example here. There's a nonprofit board that I sit on, and we give out grants and scholarships. And we work in a pretty small geographic area. And we point blank said in the applications, this is the area that we serve, period. Yet, and it's like a few counties, it's not massive. Yet we would have applicants from all over the country writing to get grants. And it's a waste of the applicant's time. It's a waste of our time because they don't match the qualifications. So please just don't do it. So a few parting words. It's pretty insane how many grants and fellowships are not awarded, not because that the project isn't good or the candidate isn't qualified and wants to do big, amazing things, but because the questions weren't answered well. And if a question isn't answered well, it's hard for the reviewer to score the application high. Remember, the reviewers have a rubric, and those rubrics fit the questions. And if you can't score it high, the application absolutely can't compete. And it feels to me like probably about at least 25%, which might sound high, but I feel like it's low in my experience. At least 25% of the applications that I've scored aren't even near in the running because of items in this video. So if all you do in your application is follow my tips of what to do and what not to do, at the very least, I think you'll be in that 50 to 75% of the applications that get pushed through to the next level. And that's what we want. I really hope this video has helped you. I hope it helps you get some money for projects that will impact you professionally and impact your students and classrooms. I hope it helps you get some really amazing fellowships. And if you have questions, absolutely, please drop them in the chat. I'm happy to respond.